distinguished guests, colleagues, students, ladies and gentlemen, a very good evening to all. My name is Anindita Dasgupta, and I am Associate Professor in Political Science and the Head of School of Liberal Arts and Sciences at Taylor's University, Malaysia. I hope everyone is keeping safe and healthy amidst the ongoing pandemic. Now, on behalf of the organizers, it is my honor and pleasure to welcome you this evening to the fourth session of the Malaysian Politics and Public Issues, or what we have come to refer to as the MPPI series of talks. The MPPI series of talks is an initiative by Zubedy's Unity and Harmony Mediators movement and Taylor School of Liberal Arts and Sciences, Bachelor of Social Science, to educate, discuss, and promote the exchange of ideas on Malaysian politics and public issues. This series was launched on the 27th of May this year with our first eminent speaker, Emeritus Professor Dr. Shad Salim Faruqi himself, who spoke on the making of the Malaysian Constitution. Now, on 17th of June, we were deeply honored to invite Dr. Chandra Muzaffar, President of the International Movement for a Just World, or JUST, to deliver the second lecture, which was on the making of the Rukun Negara. Subsequent to that, on 24th of June, Prof. Shad delivered another thought-provoking talk on understanding the Malaysian Constitution. And today, we're absolutely delighted to share that Dr. Chandra Muzaffar is back with us to deliver his much-awaited talk titled Rukun Negara as the Nation's Compass. So, ladies and gentlemen, globally, the pandemic has strained societal fault lines with increasing instances of, fear or mistrust and panic, which have been fueled further by the circulation of, some amounts of misinformation or what we call fake news and so on. And in doing so, the coronavirus is really testing the very strength of our social fabric, one that communities and nations have very carefully built and nurtured over years. And as we stumble through the era of what some scholars have termed as post-truth, the erudite voices of thought leaders such as Dr. Chandra Muzaffar gain even greater relevance as they are based on facts, history, are connected with experience and policy, and unite us in the singular quest towards a collective and sustainable future, especially our youth who are the harbingers of the future. Now, in order to produce transformational leaders of tomorrow, the School of Liberal Arts and Sciences at Taylor's University has recently launched 2 degree programs in social sciences, one with a specialization in international relations, and the other offers Asia's first specialization in social innovation and change. At Taylor's, we believe that many of the next generation of Malaysian leaders will emerge from our social science program, where students will not only spend the entire final year with being placed within eminent industries, or what we call learning by doing, but they're also exposed to great thinkers who will undoubtedly be the source of many new questions in the young and fertile mind. And one of the flagship modules in the program is titled, yes, you guessed it right, Malaysian Politics and Public Issues, one that I'm proud to share will be led by Anas Zubedy himself. My colleague, Ms. No Ainif Omar, is the module leader. Ainif, can I invite you to say a few words?
All right. Thank you, Dr. Anindita. Let me just introduce Malaysian Politics and Public Issues is a part of a module where students in Bachelor of Social Science have to take. Basically, the arrangements of this webinar series are a part of students' material to help them to understand the current public issues better, and also one of the ways to get the students to participate and experience the public issues matter in Malaysia. So this is one of our approach to get the student involved in the current issues in Malaysia. So I hope you enjoy the webinar series today and also the one in future. Thank you, Dr. Anindita.
Thank you, Ainif. So Ms. No Ainif Omar is the module leader, and Ms. Fadila Raihan Lokman is the co-instructor of this module. Fadila, any thoughts this evening?
Hello everyone. I'm Fadila. So along with Ainif, I will also co-teach this module. And as stated by Ainif just now, this webinar is very important. So not just for students, but also with all of us here, since our participants are, ranges from different people, and that we would like to hear from you guys, your thoughts on the current issues as well. Yes, that is all from me. Thanks.
Thank you, Fadila. Ladies and gentlemen, so our team led by Anas has decided to use a new way of teaching this module, as you heard from my colleagues, Ainif and Fadila, which would be through a series of public talks and forums by distinguished speakers and thought leaders who not only have a deep understanding of the foundation of this nation, but also who have themselves been architects of the idea of Malaysia. And these talks will be used as texts or learning resources for our students. Once again, today we are honored to have with us Dr. Chandra Muzaffar, the President of International Movement for a Just World among us. And the session will be moderated by none other than Anas Zubedy himself. Now, Anas Zubedy is the Managing Director of Zubedy M. Sendirian Berhad, a training company that focuses on soft skills and making people more productive and better. Zubedy has been promoting unity extensively for the last 3 decades. Yes. Anas Zubedy is a senior fellow of Human Resources Development Corporation. He is an adjunct professor at Taylor School of Liberal Arts and Sciences and director of social innovation and change at the Bachelor of Social Science, Taylor's University. And before I hand over the floor to Anas, I would like to invite all of you to join us to take a group picture, please. So please feel free to open the camera and give us your best smile. Over to you, I need to take the picture.
All right, let me just start with my first page here. All right, smile, everyone. Hold your smile. The next one. Okay. One more. All right. Okay. Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you so much. Once again, ladies and gentlemen, Anas, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Dr. Ade. Welcome, everybody. As usual, what I'll do is I will give a little bit of background and share a little bit about Dr. Chandra, and then I'll pass the floor to Dr. Chandra. Allow me to share right now. Now, why the Malaysian politics and public issues series of talks? Yeah? The reason is the goal is to provide the basic foundation and framework by experts, people like Dr. Chandra, in the subject through well thought out talks, and also create a platform for dialogue, discourses, and debates via public forums. The series of talks and forums, soon you will hear from us that we're also going to do forums. Yeah? We'll cover key topics like the Malaysian Constitution, where we've done it, socio-political history, public policies, and specific topics like education, national culture, general elections, integration, and economics. Obviously, these topics are alive, and many Malaysians, more and more Malaysians are getting more interested in knowing in a far more informed way. Ultimately, we want to educate, discuss, and promote the exchange of ideas about Malaysian politics and public issues, but in a mature, rational, and justly balanced way. This is what we need as a country, as a nation, the ability to discuss politics in a mature, rational, and a justly balanced way. Now, this is the fourth of the series. The first one, Making of Malaysian Constitution, by Prof. Shah, and Dr. Chandra was here in 17 June, making of Rukun Negara. Today, we're going to go one more step further. Rukun Negara is a nation's compass. Yeah, so in other words, you can see we are slowly building. It is like a syllabus for Malaysian, not just for the students in Taylor's, a syllabus for Malaysian to get to know Malaysian politics, public issues better. And you see in the next item 5, 6, 7, 8, these are very important knowledge for us to have as a nation: Islam and the Malaysian Constitution, integration of Sabah, Sarawak, and Semenanjung, the Malaysian parliamentary democracy, and lessons from our general elections. So we have another 4 to go for this series, and then we will come back with another list of wonderful, interesting subjects to share with you. Now, allow me to say a little bit about Dr. Chandra. Dr. Chandra Muzaffar is the president of International Movement for a Just World, short form JUST, an international NGO based in Malaysia, which seeks to critique global injustice and to develop an alternative vision of a just and compassionate civilization guided by universal spiritual and moral values. He has published extensively on civilizational dialogue, international politics, religion, human rights, and Malaysian society. In fact, to share, during my university days, Dr. Chandra's book were some of my main books to study in Malaysian politics. Now, the author and editor of 32 books in English and Malay, many of his writings have been translated to other languages. Among Dr. Chandra's latest publications are A World in Crisis, Is There a Cure? And Reflections on Malaysian Unity and Other Challenges. In 1977, he founded a multi-ethnic social reform group called Aliran Negara, short form Aliran, which he led for 14 years. Today, apart from his role in JUST, Dr. Chandra sits on the board of a number of international NGOs concerned with social justice and civilizational dialogue. Dr. Chandra was professor and director of Center of Civilizational Dialogue, University of Malaya from 1997 to 1999, and professor of global studies at University of Science Malaysia 2007-2012. Dr. Chandra travels abroad frequently, giving lectures and speaking at seminars and conferences. He's also a regular speaker at meetings at home in Malaysia. Dr. Chandra is a recipient of a number of international awards related to his scholarship and social activism. Dr. Chandra is married to Mariam Muhammad Hashim and have 2 daughters, 2 granddaughters, and 5 grandsons. Dr. Chandra, I pass to you the floor. Dr. Chandra will share with us Rukun Negara as the nation's compass.
Thank you, Anas. Good evening to Prof. Dasgupta, friends, for part of the team. Peace be with you. I'd like to begin by thanking the organizers of this lecture for their kind invitation. It's a pleasure to be speaking to you again today. The Rukun Negara was envisaged when it was launched on the 31st of August, 1970. It was envisaged as the compass of the nation. And we have continued to pay lip service to this idea that it is the nation's compass, though in reality, it may not have really played this role, which is what we'll try to explore this evening. Why it has not been able to play this role, what are the advantages of the Rukun Negara playing this particular role, and what is the future of the Rukun Negara, very briefly. Now, as I said a while ago, it was conceptualized as a sort of compass for the nation. One can say that in the first few years, even if it did not play the role of a compass, it was something that one referred to every now and then, the Rukun Negara. And the Prime Minister, after the birth of the Rukun Negara, this was Tun Razak, the second Prime Minister of Malaysia, he tried to weave the Rukun Negara into policy making. The second Malaysia plan from 1971 to 1975 openly proclaimed that the Rukun Negara is the sort of guideline for the second Malaysia plan. And there were occasions when the ministers in his cabinet, notably Tun Dr. Ismail and other ministers, they presented the Rukun Negara as an important guideline for the nation. It is also significant that the Rukun Negara was seen as something which would address the problems of multi-ethnic Malaysia. And this was demonstrated in a particular incident, which is worth repeating here. This was an incident that involved the building of a Hindu temple somewhere in the brickfields area. And there were some people from that locality who protested because they thought that the Hindu temple disrupted the flow of traffic in that area and the sort of general pattern of living of the people in that locality. The Minister of Special Functions at that time, someone by the name of Ghazali Shafi, who was a prominent advocate of the Rukun Negara, he adopted a very interesting approach. He said that if you are thinking of just development, then you may not have a place for the temple in that area. But if, on the other hand, you're thinking of Malaysia as a nation founded upon the Rukun Negara, guided by the Rukun Negara, then the temple has a place in that locality. So we'll have to conceive of development, he said. I'm just paraphrasing what he said. We'll have to conceive of development as something which would allow the temple to be where it is, and one would build one's roads and other facilities in such a manner that it do not disrupt the existence of the temple or its activities. That was an example which he gave to the nation of the application of the Rukun Negara, sensitivity to our religious diversity, to the religions of the minorities, just as one will have to be sensitive to the religion of the majority. But that's part of the Rukun Negara philosophy, as it were. It's an interesting example of how one could apply the Rukun Negara, because, you know, the first of the 5 aspirations of the Rukun Negara is related to national unity. And if you look at some of the other aspirations and principles, you can argue that they're also related to nation building in the broader sense of the term. So there was some attempt to give meaning to the Rukun Negara. It was recited in schools, though there was no attempt to explain in depth at that time. And some of the media programs had some reference to the Rukun Negara. This was the early years, early 70s. You know. But then certain things happened. Unfortunately, in 1973, the Deputy Prime Minister at that time, a firm proponent of the Rukun Negara, Tun Dr. Ismail, passed away. And a few years later, in 1976, Tun Razak, some would regard him as the father of the Rukun Negara, actually. He was the chairman of the Consultative Council, as I mentioned in my last lecture, that drafted the Rukun Negara. He passed away. So the individuals who were right at the forefront of the Rukun Negara were no longer around. But the third Prime Minister, Tun Hussein Onn, he continued to give importance to the Rukun Negara. And those of you here who are older will remember that there was a very big controversy when he was Prime Minister over the Merdeka University. the proposal to establish a Chinese language university in the country. And it gave rise to a bit of debate. The debate took on an ethnic flavor, as one would expect. And it was linked to the question of university places, all the rest of it. In the end, this issue that had become quite contentious was resolved by a formula proposed by Tun Hussein on himself. And he told the nation that this was the Rukun Negara way of trying to resolve the problem. They came up with a ratio and also a long-term planning, a long-term plan on allocation of university places and the rest of it. And it helped to resolve that problem. So this was another example of the application of the Rukun Negara. Tun Hussein was Prime Minister from 1976 to 1981. And he stepped down in 1981, around July, if I'm not mistaken. And he was succeeded by Dr. Mahathir Mohamad, who went on to become the longest serving Prime Minister in the country. And he was not just the fourth Prime Minister, he became the seventh Prime Minister. And who knows what will happen after this. But there was Mahathir as the Prime Minister. Now, during the Mahathir years, the Rukun Negara was sidelined. It was no longer prominent. It was sidelined. What the real reasons are, one will never know, because no one has really delved into this. Why the Rukun Negara, the nation's philosophy, was sidelined. It was still there in schools. Kids recited the Rukun Negara, an occasional program, but by and large, the Rukun Negara was no longer at the center. And that went on for a long while, right up to 2003, when Tun Mahathir stepped down as Prime Minister. After Tun Mahathir had retired, and before he returned to the prime ministership, those intervening years, his successors, Tun Abdullah Badawi, the fourth prime minister, or the fifth prime minister rather, and then Najib Razak, the sixth prime minister, they tried to give some emphasis to the Rukun Negara, especially Abdullah Badawi. He wanted to try to bring back the Rukun Negara, but it was not possible. We would hold an occasional seminar and talk about it here and there, but it was no longer what it was before. Najib Razak, the prime minister succeeded him, did not pay much attention to the Rukun Negara either. A little bit of lip service to the Rukun Negara. And that brings us, of course, to the current prime minister. And Tan Sri Mahyudin, in some ways, has given more attention to the Negara than his immediate predecessors. He has not only given emphasis to the Rukun Negara in terms of speeches, in terms of nation-building programs and so on, he has, for the first time, made the Rukun Negara central to our national unity policy. It is stated openly that our national unity policy would be shaped by the Constitution and the Rukun Negara. And he has also given space to the Rukun Negara in various types of activities. But not much implementation has taken place, largely because of the situation we're in now, the COVID-19 crisis, the economic crisis, the political crisis, and all the rest of it. But it was undoubtedly what Tan Sri Mahyudin did, an attempt to bring back the Rukun Negara and make it part of the nation-building effort. Now, why did the Rukun Negara get sidelined? That I think is very important to understand. What are the reasons behind this? One, I've alluded to, I think it is to do with political leadership. From Tun Mahathir onwards, but especially Tun Mahathir and the other leaders around him, who were not that enthusiastic about the Rukun Negara. Why Tun Mahathir adopted such an attitude, it's something that one can only speculate, but it was not important to him. For him, what the nation had to do was to concentrate upon physical development, on infrastructure development. And in the process, it transformed the socioeconomic structure of the country. One can't deny this. More than anyone else, it was Dr. Mahathir helped to create a multi-ethnic middle class. And that was an achievement. But in the process, he neglected the Rukun Negara. And that would be an important reason, political leadership, change in political leadership, why the Rukun Negara was sidelined. It is also related to other developments. From the 70s onwards, and especially in the 80s, because of other changes that were happening in the country, basically rural-urban migration, the transformation of our cities, and the class structure, the Malays who moved to the cities in large numbers, it was a much needed attempt to overcome the disparities in the cities, to overcome socioeconomic disparities and so on. Now, quite a lot of Malays in the cities in search of identity, of an attempt, as it were, to reassert and to redefine identity within the urban setting. They turned to Islam. And Islam became increasingly important in the country, a product of the transformation that was taking place at the level of society itself. And as Islam became more and more important, it became a sort of ideology, a way of life for a lot of urban Malays. The Rukun Negara was something which one did not pay much attention to. One was more concerned about Islamization of one's Islamic identity, what it meant in that new setting. Understandable, given the fact that before the change that had taken place in urban Malaysia was largely non-Muslim, preponderantly non-Muslim. So an attempt to define one's identity. And as a result of that, some of the things which were emphasized before began to lose their significance. And there could have been other reasons which would explain this change that had taken place. Leadership, a change in the socioeconomic landscape leading to changes in the socio-political landscape, which in turn reflected in the way in which ideologies, worldviews have become important. A very significant change was taking place in the country. And one could argue that perhaps there were also international currents, because the 80s was also a time when Islam had become more prominent globally in various parts of the world. Don't forget, 1979 was the Iranian Revolution. In 1979 was also the invasion of Afghanistan by the NATO forces, and Islam became more prominent for Muslims in terms of defending and protecting their identity. It also became important to societies which were multi-religious. So that could have also been a factor that brought about this change in the worldview and in the way in which people saw themselves and the way in which they saw others. In other words, the Rukun Negara receded, not as a result of a concerted policy as such, but because of these developments, leadership, socioeconomic landscape, domestically speaking, and the international environment. And in this new scenario, there was less and less talk about Rukun Negara and nation building. So that explains the change that had taken place. And younger Malaysians, especially younger Malays, who became the sort of flag bearers of Islamization and of the new ethos, they did not see the relevance of the Rukun Negara. Some became even very critical of the Rukun Negara, and this was also true of the non-Malays, the segment of the non-Malay population. Now, that leads me on to this discussion about the non-Malays in relation to the Negara in the 80s. Issue that has not really been broached very often in this country. For the non-Malays, the reaction to Islamization was to re-emphasize and reassert their own identity. The Chinese identity, the Indian identity, other sub-identities became more important. And at the same time, as they reasserted their identities, symbols changed, various signposts linked to the community changed. There was not much support for the Rukun Negara. There wasn't great deal of support for the first instance, but it became worse. And what troubled them even further, because they were reacting against Islamization to some extent, they became uneasy with the first principle of the Rukun Negara, belief in God. Since the first principle was there, belief in God, they thought that the Rukun Negara was an attempt to get people to believe in God or to become Muslims. And so there was less empathy for the Rukun Negara. This is, of course, not true. There was no attempt to Islamicize anyone through the Rukun Negara. But this negative attitude towards the Rukun Negara became stronger within a certain segment of the non-Muslim communities that were more geared towards looking at the world through atheistic or agnostic lenses. Hence, the Rukun Negara again lost its significance. So that explains a very important aspect of our lecture this evening, why the Rukun Negara became less important among both Malays and non-Malays from the 80s onwards. And though there have been attempts to bring back the Rukun Negara, as I alluded to just now, Abdul Badawi to a limited extent, and then of course now the present Prime Minister, it faces a different environment, a changed environment, and it makes it very difficult. Islamization is more than a reality. Non-Malay ethnic sentiments are much more than a reality. They are very strong, well entrenched, deeply embedded in our society today as a result of developments that took place earlier and trends that became stronger and stronger over a period of time. And that is why those of us who have tried to bring back the Rukun Negara found it quite difficult. For instance, a few friends of mine and I, we were supported by many others, friends, those who cared for the Rukun Negara, people like Anas, Zubedy, and others. But this small group of individuals, those of us who were trying to revive the Rukun Negara, we wanted to make it the preamble to the Constitution. It didn't go very far because there was quite a bit of opposition to it. And we thought one way of saving this attempt to revive the Rukun Negara was to suggest that we make it the compass of the nation. Hence the title of what we're discussing this evening. And we managed to persuade though this has not been highlighted, we managed to persuade the Conference of Rulers to view the Rukun Negara as the compass of the nation. And this was done in a statement put out by the Conference of Rulers on the 10th of October, 2017. That is the year that we had this campaign to strengthen the Rukun Negara. And we tried to get members of parliament, the new parliament, 2018, after the 14th general election, to also support the Conference of Rulers and support this idea of the Rukun Negara as the compass nation. We wrote to all members of parliament. The response is very, very poor. And only, I think, 4 MPs responded after 222 MPs. We didn't have any seats to offer. We didn't have anything to offer these people. So the response, expectedly, was worse than lukewarm, just 4 individuals. But we plugged on. We continued to fight for this cause, and this is where we are. Now I find that NSS Harmony Program and Taylor's University, they've taken up this cause, which I think is good. That's the way it should be. That others will come along, take it up, and maybe have to strengthen this struggle to make the Rukun Negara central to the nation. Why is that important? Why should the Rukun Negara play this role? Or is it something that we should just give up, since there hasn't been much success at the level of the masses, the people? I think there are many good reasons continuing to be faithful to the Rukun Negara. One, which is very obvious, is if you look at its principles and its aspirations, they make sense from the point of view of national integration, which is one of the reasons why the Rukun Negara was put forward as a document for the nation, a document of destiny. But it's more than national unity. It is nation building as a whole. The Rukun Negara is also about the redistribution of wealth in an equitable manner. That's the third goal of the Rukun Negara, redistribution of wealth. It is about a democratic way of life, which is the second principle, the second goal of the Rukun Negara. So you've got social justice, democracy. It is about a progressive society guided by science and technology, which is yet another goal of the Rukun Negara. It is about a liberal approach, meaning by which an inclusive, accommodative approach to the rich cultural traditions in the country. That's not only about integration, it is about recognizing the realities that are shaping the world. So there are many good reasons why we should continue to talk about the Rukun Negara for the nation, and as I will mention towards the end of this lecture, for the world as a whole. Ideas like the Rukun Negara, of course not the Rukun Negara because it's specific to our country, but ideas like this are very important for the world as it is beginning to unfold. So there is a case to continue this struggle for the Rukun Negara. The obstacles are great, but I think if we can show people why it's relevant to their lives, the lives of ordinary people, for instance, why is a goal like national unity important? It should be obvious to most Malaysians. We have to learn to integrate. We have to try to express empathy for one another, which is the essence of national unity, empathy for one another, and that is lacking in our society. The Rukun Negara is not the cure-all for this lack of empathy, but it is something which would help us to move in that direction. And we feel that it's also very, very important for Malaysians to see Malaysia as part of the larger world. In other words, we have to go beyond concentrating on our belly button. All the while, I'm not looking at the larger universe. And the Rukun Negara makes a lot of sense from that perspective. Just like if you look at the formulation of the United Nations Charter, which, as you know, was led by a small team, and its leader was Eleanor Roosevelt, the wife of the President of the United States for a long while, from 1932 to 1945. Eleanor Roosevelt played a very big role in shaping the UN Charter. And one of the things that inspired her was, of course, the American Constitution and its Declaration of Independence. So likewise, if you look at our Rukun Negara, it should make us universal now. We should look at the world and the shaping of the world in terms of the ideals which we are supposed to subscribe to. In other words, there should be individuals emerging from this nation in the future, young people who will be committed to this notion of global citizenship. The Rukun Negara helps push them in the direction. Am I optimistic about this, or am I pessimistic about this? My answer would be I'm neither. I think a lot will depend on our efforts in the future, what we will do. But when I look at the realities that challenge us locally and internationally, I think we have no choice but to learn how to live together, to build nations which are solid in terms of their empathy for one another, for different communities and cultures. As I said a while ago, we have no choice because there's no other way of surviving. I've often said either we survive together or we perish together. So we have to develop this for us, our nation, and for the world as a whole. And we have become more and more conscious of this in the last 1 year, if I may say this, that we have to learn how to live together, work together, survive together. Otherwise, as I said a while ago, we perish together. Literally, we perish together. I'm referring to the COVID crisis, the COVID challenge. We don't help one another, we perish together. If you display characteristics of selfishness, if you do what has come to be called policies that are reflective of apartheid, or is known as vaccine apartheid, then I think we'll all be in trouble. So likewise, within Malaysia, we have to adopt policies, we have to adopt approaches which are inclusive, accommodative, which bring people together, not only in a crisis, but at every moment of our time. It's a very big challenge, but that is a challenge that we must, each and every one of us, especially the young, we must be prepared to take up this challenge. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Chandra. Thank you for passionately explaining how the Rukun Negara can be encompassed, and also giving us some interesting stories and examples of the past of leaders who believe in Rukun Negara, and how they quoted Rukun Negara as a reason for their actions and policies. I think those are very good stories for us to know and share. Yeah? I would share some, we already have quite a few questions. I will go straight to the questions. And those who want to ask more questions, you can start typing in the chat group. Chandra, it's you.
Yeah.
Okay. I try to combine some of the questions which is not too far away into one page. Yeah. This question from Eng Chai Sia and Te Ram Sam. Since 1970 till now, so far, how is the effectiveness of Rukun Negara for the nation building in Malaysia? Very focused nation building. The second question says, we seem to have strayed from our Rukun Negara aspirations and principles. Your suggestions on how we can collectively restore them.
Yeah. All right, two questions about an evaluation, as it were, since 1970. I think my lecture has more or less given an idea of what happened. So that would be the evaluation. We've adopted a very sort of sporadic approach. At certain times, yes, at other times, no. In terms of our commitment, we have done a few things here and there, but not really gone into depth in trying to understand the Rukun Negara to give it greater meaning. So we should just compare our position to that of Indonesia to understand what has been happening here. Indonesia had its Pancasila from 1945. That's the year it became independent. It's part of the Indonesian constitution, it's in the preamble and in the constitution. But Indonesia, right from the beginning, has given a lot of attention, a lot of emphasis to its Pancasila. In terms of education, consciousness building, in terms of, well, even public policy in some respects, though they've been less successful as far as the last bit is concerned. But the attempt, the endeavor is there. And I say this with much regret, because you see in Indonesia, since 1945, they have had changes, not only in terms of leaders, but in terms of systems of governance. And you know how difficult it is when a system of governance changes. In Malaysia, whatever it is, since 1957, we've had parliamentary democracy. Since 1970, we've had parliamentary democracy. That's when Rukun Negara was introduced. And though it was introduced at a time when Parliament was suspended, but our system of governance has been largely parliamentary democracy, constitutional monarchy, as we are fond of saying. In other words, no change as such. And yet, though there's been no change, and even in terms of leadership, of course, in Malaysia, Suharto was there for 32 years. Yet Dr. Mahathir was with us for 22 years as Prime Minister, long periods. And since ours is a parliamentary democracy, one would have thought that one would be able to mobilize people in a much more effective manner to support the Rukun, but we haven't done that. That's because there wasn't that will, the part of the leadership, and other factors that I talked about, changes in thinking that developed as a result of other larger changes in Malaysian society. Now, your second question is perhaps more important. What can one do to make the Rukun Negara more viable, more meaningful? I think there's a great deal we can do, not just reciting them in schools. We should explain what it is, analyze, explain, demonstrate to young people in particular how the Rukun Negara can be a sort of living document. To give you an example, we talk about kesopanan and kesusilaan, good behavior, public morality. Maybe we should start in schools. Kids, teachers, the way we talk to one another, the importance of politeness, good manners. That would be something very small. We can talk about democracy as a way of life by perhaps introducing certain facets of democratic life through the school system. Apart from kids choosing their class monitor, being more involved in discussions and debates, looking at issues, trying to understand issues and so on. If they could do that, then I think you begin to plant the seeds of the democratic way of life. That's at the level of schools and perhaps extended to universities and so on. But there are many other things that we can do. Every year, we can evaluate the implementation of certain public policies on the basis of the Rukun Negara. Has it contributed more towards the equitable distribution of wealth? It's not too difficult to evaluate that, to measure that. Could we also not perhaps do something to measure whether we have reflected some enduring perennial values associated with the divine in our public policies? Kindness, compassion, love, compassion towards foreign workers, for instance, refugees. Do we show kindness towards our refugees or treat them in such a manner that you violate the first principle of the Rukun Negara? Because you believe in God, you have to show kindness and compassion. There are many other examples we can think of, but we have not really made any attempt to give meaning to the Rukun Negara. But it can be done if we are earnest and if we are determined to do this.
Thank you, Chandra. I'll go to the next question.
Yeah.
Now, this question by Yalini is Varalingam. Do you think point 3 of Rukun Negara is practice justice? Yeah, if all citizens are not treated equally. Discrimination towards non-Malays seems more rampant now more than ever. And the second question, I lumped them a bit together because they almost talk about racism and how will you define racism and institutional racism? And the third one, this is by Greg Lopez and Dr. Zaimi Johanna Johan asks, the Rukun Negara was aimed at forging racial unity and harmony among the nation's multiracial communities. However, Malaysian politics have been fragmented over race, religion, and reform. I'm not too sure about the last one, reform. What is your views on this?
Now, so the first one is,
do you think Rukun Negara, justice is practiced in Rukun Negara if all citizens are not treated equally?
yeah.
Discrimination towards non-Malays seems more rampant now more than ever.
Yeah, and the other one is more or less an offshoot of that sort of question, yeah, about the nation being divided along ethnic and religious lines. Now, first of all, the use of terms. I seldom use the word racial to describe the situation in Malaysia because, you know, the term racial from a sociological perspective, it has a biological connotation. You can talk of racial divides, racial dichotomies in the United States and in many other countries. But in Malaysia, it is not racial. The term itself is wrong. We can talk of ethnic problems, we can talk of communal problems, we can talk of problems related to religion. These are real problems in Malaysia, but they're not racial because there's no biological dimension to ethnic problems in Malaysia. In other words, we don't adopt certain policies or certain stance because of the person's skin texture or because of the person's hair or the color of his or her eyes. We don't do those things. So I think the term racial should be used in its right context. And I've been saying this for a long while. We can't use the term racial to describe the Malaysian situation. We have communal problems. We have problems related to religion. And like in all societies, to understand a problem and therefore to apply solutions, we have to understand its context, its setting. Because if you don't understand the setting, you will get it all wrong. In Malaysia, for instance, a very important reality that impinges upon relations between different communities one of what I see as the two important realities that you can't run away from. The first one, the reality that you cannot run away from is that present day Malaya and then Malaysia emerged from a Malay polity. Can't run away from it. A lot of non-Malays, even though they may sometimes pay lip service to it, they don't really understand the full implications of this. It emerged from a Malay polity, meaning by which you had Malay kingdoms before the non-Malays settled down in these basically Malay kingdoms. It was kingdoms which were state systems in every sense of the term. You take the Kedah kingdom, for instance. It was a full-fledged nation state that exercised jurisdiction in domestic terms and had external relations. Now, how is it possible to build a nation and ignore all this? You cannot. This is the history of this no land. And elements from that past, they become so much a part of our reality. And of these elements, I would want to mention two very important trends. One was the coming of Islam to Southeast Asia. The coming of Islam is also linked to the spread of Malay language, as some of you know, in this region. They are intertwined. But the coming of Islam changed the entire landscape. For the first time, a world religion became part of the religion of the masses. Hinduism and Buddhism, which were practiced by small coteries, especially at the elite level, never became mass religions in most of Southeast Asia. And this change meant a very big change in one's conception of life, of values, oneself, of the other, all these things not change. It's a very, very important transformation that took place. And with Islam, there was the Malay language, which played the role of a unifier. It was a lingua franca for this region, millions of people, long before it became the official language of either Indonesia or Malaysia. It was already the language of communication, what is known as lingua franca. These are realities. And the other reality is that you had the Malay sultanates, and they remained, and they were part of the landscape for a very, very long while. Of course, in Indonesia, it was a different story. But in the case of the Malay Peninsula, it was part of our reality for a very, very long while. So you have to take this into account whenever you talk about ethnic relations. To put it very bluntly, the logical outcome of the Malay sultanates in the past, and even during the colonial period they remained, the logical outcome of those Malay polities, political systems, would have been a Malay nation. That would have been the logical outcome, as it happened in other parts of the world. But a Malay nation did not emerge. What emerged was a nation that the Malays as a people had to share with others, were not Malays. And that has had a profound impact on our society. Ethnic relations, economy, politics, culture, everything. From a nation, in a sense, historically speaking, the Malays became a community among communities. I hardly know of non-Malays who appreciate this, who understand this and appreciate this, whether politics or outside politics, including academics and others, in spite of attempts to convey this very simple message. So this reality, keep it in mind whenever you talk about ethnic relations or what you call race and so on. When people say, oh, why is this person promoting the Malay language? Why not? Where else can you promote the Malay language? This is the land. This is the region of the world, right? And the other reality, as I said, is the coming of the non-Malays and their domicile during the colonial period. It changed our societies forever. And there is also a very important reality that one should keep in mind. They settled down initially, of course, migrants, you know, they were in their own enclaves, separated, differentiated, and so on. And then after independence, the challenge of trying to integrate everyone. When you integrate all of them, there's one thing that you should never do. You should never adopt an approach that gives the impression that you're integrating people who all of a sudden came together. That's not how it happened. There were people who were here, there were established polities, there were people who came later, settled down, became part of the landscape. And integrating people along these lines is very difficult, whether it's Malaysia or the Fijis or Kenya or Tanzania or Guyana or places like that. I'm giving you examples of societies that came under colonial rule, which made the situation very different and very difficult. Malaysia should be in those categories of states. In other words, the challenge is immense, this sort of integration. And we have not done too badly. You see it from their perspective. A lot of problems, a lot of challenges, and someone, I think that was the second question, saying it's becoming worse. Well, I don't know whether it has become worse. I think in some situations, the situation may have improved in some areas. For instance, I can give you some very concrete examples. In 1969, in the elections, there was so much sensitivity about a Malay minister who sent a greeting card to his Chinese friends with himself in a Chinese costume. It became a very big issue. And he was one of the leaders of the party, but that election, he won with a very, very narrow margin because it was a preponderantly Malay constituency and such a big issue. But today, I don't think anyone quarrels about the sort of attire you use, whether you put on, you know, women in Malaysia, a lot of Chinese and Indian girls and girls of other parentage, you know, they use the baju kurung. It's not an issue. This is voluntary. They do it on their own. It's not an issue. Yeah. So things have changed in some areas in a positive sense. In other areas, no. That's why I say it's very complex. When it comes to, say, religion, I think the situation has become worse. As far as religion is concerned, you know, this sort of notion of hard and fast boundaries that you can't mix. Your child cannot go to the home of a person of another religion. You should not take a drink from the mother of your friend. You know, that sort of thing, which to my mind, I think is very, very sad. Now, things like that. So there are trends that are complex, they're happening, and you must be able to handle them. But I think what is important is, you know, there's no simplistic solution. I thank the divine, I thank God, you know, that compared to many other societies, and this is a definable, tangible measure of the degree of ethnic harmony or disharmony in the society. We have had only one major ethnic riot. You compare it to India, to Sri Lanka, to Pakistan, to France, to Britain, to many other countries. We've done very well in terms of managing ethnic relations from that point of view. But we should not be complacent. The challenge is immense. There's a lot more to be done. We tend to approach these challenges by sweeping things under the carpet, which I don't think is the way. We must talk about them, discuss them, perhaps not through public debates, but there must be channels that exist for people to discuss these things frankly. Like what you've asked today, our friend who asked this question, it would be seen as very sensitive in some quarters. But here you have a university platform, and we're discussing this in a very sane and rational manner. I don't think anyone will break anyone's head after this session, because you can discuss these things in a very sane manner. I remember 35, 40 years ago, I suggested to the government of the day at that time. We were talking about ethnic relations. I think let's discuss some of these things on radio, television, and do it in a very calm and dispassionate manner. But they were not interested. I think that's the problem. It is not the existence of the ethnic challenge, but it's the way we approach them. This is what we'll have to change.
I will take some question that's now been in the chat group. Yeah, I will just try to read one or two of them. The first one here, to what extent institutional reform, such as good governance and integrity measures, can enhance Rukun Negara aspiration?
Okay, that's a good question. I think it would be a great boost to Rukun Negara, to nation building as a whole, if there's good governance and ethical conduct. Very, very important, because if people begin to see that all communities are holding on to these values and principles, and there are good people in all communities who are doing it even now, but somehow I think the general populace has not been able to see it along these lines. We very quickly label people along ethnic lines in this country, and that is a problem. It is a flaw. And it is there because of our ignorance, our lack of understanding, our inability to handle these issues. And I would like to see that change. We don't know how it can be done. I mean, this is undoubtedly a beginning. And it's a pity that more universities are not doing things like this, that you discuss issues which are very, very important for the future. But you can do it in a very calm and dispassionate manner. So good governance, you can show people why it's vital. Good work ethics, to cut across ethnic lines. And if we can strengthen good work ethics, I think relations among communities will also improve. Because people will say, these are good work ethics, everyone subscribes to them. But we're not doing that.
I think I'll take another one here. This is an interesting one. There is a perception that the first principle of Rukun Negara, belief in God, puts all God-centric religions on an equal footing, and this is therefore not acceptable to any religious supremacists. Any comments, please?
Well, you're right to some extent that one of the reasons why some Muslims are not happy with Kepercayaan pada Tuhan is because they think that it sort of equalizes all the religions. My answer to that would be, just as I'd like to answer some of the non-Muslim peers about belief in God, but starting with the Muslims, those who are unhappy about this, they say, it equalizes all religions, or sort of regards the divine from a lens that is unacceptable to Islam. Kepercayaan kepada Tuhan was put deliberately into the Rukun Negara, and it was proposed by some of its leading Muslim members of the National Consultative Council, because they knew that if it was kepercayaan pada Allah, it would be a problem for the non-Muslims, and the Muslims won't be happy either that you are ascribing Allah to non-Muslims in that sense. So choose a term which is neutral in a sense. And people see that as a neutral term. And in the end, the entire council of 60 over members, a lot of the Muslims, they accepted that argument. If I may share with you, since this happened a long time ago and it is documented, the person who pushed for this was actually my late teacher, my guru, the late Professor Syed Hussein Alatas, who wanted Kepercayaan pada Tuhan. It's the first principle. In fact, there were some people who wanted, as the first principle, it's very interesting, kesetiaan pada Raja dan Negara, above kepercayaan pada Tuhan. And people who know Islam, like Prof. Syed Hussein and others, the objective payment because the kepercayaan pada Tuhan has to take precedence over kesetiaan pada Raja dan Negara. It's very obvious to some of us who know how this notion of loyalty to king and country can be abused, much more easily than certain other notions. So as far as the Muslims who are uneasy about this is concerned, I think we can respond to it quite well by saying, it is not equalizing religions, which I know is problematic with quite a lot of many people, but it is merely telling them that there is a God which all of us can identify with in our own ways, in different ways. You have different names, you may even have different attributes to God, you may have different notions of what happens in the afterlife, but that's okay. You can hold on to all those things. But do you believe in something transcendent? That's one of the strengths of the Rukun Negara. There is a transcendent element. And when you see development, nation building, and so on, from a perspective that includes the transcendent, that includes the transcendent and doesn't just concentrate on the materialistic base of life, then I think you will see the difference. You know that there is something beyond, the here and now.
Let's take one or two more.
Let me, Anas, if I may, deal with the non-Muslim fear.
Yes, please. Yeah.
See, the non-Muslims, some of them say, we are atheists. How can we, sort of accept a charter which has belief in God as the first thing? Now this keeps coming up, this question. It is not a problem because kepercayaan pada Tuhan, like all the other 5 principles and the 5 aspirations, they reflect the principles and aspirations of the majority. Majority of Malaysians percaya pada Tuhan. There is a minority that may not, which is not a problem. But that minority should not reject the Rukun Negara simply because of that one principle. Because I'm sure there are some Malaysian citizens who do not believe in, say, democracy. And the democratic way of life is the second aspiration. It is in the Rukun Negara. But because of that, are we going to say, don't include democracy? We keep the term democracy. Just as I'm sure there's some Malaysians who don't believe in a progressive society based upon science and technology. They'll say, no, I think this is voodoo science and technology. We don't believe in this sort of a thing, but we put it there because the vast majority would prescribe to this, or for that matter, liberal society and so on. So this is the concept of the majority. The majority hold on to this principle, but it doesn't give the majority the right to suppress that minority that doesn't believe in God. And it's very interesting that if you look at Indonesia, there have been controversies over the Pancasila, whose first principle is also Keesahan Tuhan, the oneness of God. And yet there's never been a controversy in multi-religious Indonesia, mind you, because you've got Buddhists. And one can argue, Buddhists, do they believe in God? Or is it also a question of interpretation? Some would argue it's interpretation. It is what one means by God, and some Buddhists would say, yes, there is a notion of transcendence. Others would say, no, Buddhism doesn't support this sort of thing, but they've never rejected the Pancasila just because of its first principle. So I think that it should be received.
Thank you, Ajahn. This is an interesting question. It says, we have been introduced to the brief version of Rukun Negara, but not aware of the so-called complete version of it. Is there one? If there is one, where to get it? Is there a more complete document about Rukun Negara?
Well, it's an important question. The Rukun Negara in its entirety includes the 5 aspirations, the 5 principles. It also includes the commentaries on each of the 5 aspirations and the 5 principles. The commentaries are quite brief, they're not very long. And most of the commentaries, even today, they are relevant, But what my friends and I in that group that tried to advocate the Rukun Negara as the preamble, what we tried to do was we sort of further developed the 5 commentaries for the principles and the 5 commentaries for the aspirations. They're available. You'll see them in the Yasser Perpaduan website. They're available, and we have brought in all these concerns, about belief in God, and other issues, about democracy and so on. And again, it's such a pity that in our society, there was no attempt even to give a hearing to this endeavor on the part of everyone. I'm not just referring to the individuals in power at that time. I mean, you would be interested to know that the ruling party at that time, when we presented the Rukun Negara for their endorsement after the 14th general election, was the Pakatan Harapan. There were only 2 persons, I think, from the Pakatan Harapan, individuals, backbenchers who endorsed the thing. And the other 2 came from the opposition. 1 passed and 1 person from the Barisan Nasional.
Only 4, huh?
Yeah, only 4.
We got a lot of work to do.
Yeah, true.
Yeah. Right. Let me just take another question. Maybe a couple more. Huh? This is an interesting one. I thought it's a cheeky one, which is I thought we should do it. How do we school the politicians, since we talk on Rukun Negara, before asking the public to respect and apply it?
Yeah. Well, they're the most difficult people to school. If we're talking about making them aware, conscious, very, very difficult. Even trying to get across this message that we are in the midst of perhaps the most dangerous crisis that we have known in our history, more than post-May 13th, actually.
Correct.
Post-May 13th, the riot was tamed very quickly. They're actually not kidding. Huh? And then, of course, it was addressing the issues of nation building, including the Rukun Negara. But now, if you look at the situation, people are still dying. And the numbers are going up, the infections. And we're not the only one, but we are one of the very few countries in the world which is embroiled in a political crisis, which could have been avoided. There's no reason to get into this sort of political crisis. And this, in spite of all the attempts to convince people that we should first concentrate upon the health crisis and the economic crisis. And the economic crisis is long term, It may not even be over in 5 years. We don't know. But we have to concentrate on things that really matter. It affects the lives of people. So this is what I mean when I say it's very difficult to convince politicians to do things that are beyond their own interests. They may do things that are good if they think it serves their immediate interests, but get them to do things that are beyond their immediate interests, beyond their care. They won't respond. They'll find all sorts of reasons to not really respond to things like this. This, I think, is really a shame. It is a shame. And I think I have some right to say this because I was once a politician. So I'm condemning my own tribe, as it were. Yeah, but I got out of it very quickly. It reminds me of what the late Syed Hussein Alatas used to tell me, because he was also in politics for a very short while. He used to say that you get into politics and somehow you're not suited for politics. There are only 2 possible fates that await you. One is you change and become a crocodile, like all the other crocodiles, that you have joined, or you get eaten up by the crocodiles. Yeah, there's no other way. You must be prepared for that. If you're not prepared for that sort of thing, it's tough to remain in politics. But nonetheless, politics is a reality. You need to have good people to enter politics, maybe some younger people who have the stomach for politics, to be able to continue this struggle.
Final question. I think it's a good question to end tonight's discussion. How do you define good citizenship? I think we can link it with Rukun Negara. It would be nice. How do we define good citizenship? By Sharin Santana.
Sorry, bye.
Sorry,
Come
again.
again. Last bit. It is the name of the person, is it?
Tarin Sandana, yeah. Yeah.
All right. Well, I think the Rukun Negara is a document that contains good principles and good values. And you're a good citizen if you can hold on to those values and principles. But it's more than that. I think the great thing about living in a multi-religious society like this and living with your eyes open, your ears open, and maybe your mouth, closed, right? Sort of coming to terms with the realities of a multi-religious society, you find that in all our religions, there are good values. They're good values. And if we can practice those good values, whether you're a Buddhist or a Hindu or a Christian, Muslim, Jain, Sikh, whatever, and even good values which are part of the secular tradition, good values, kindness, love. The Dalai Lama was once asked, what does religion mean to him? And his answer was, it means kindness, which to my mind was a very profound answer. Kindness is, what it is. So if one can show kindness and compassion and love and understanding, right? And these go beyond the mind, they are sort of attributes of the heart. It's very important. The heart is very important. If these attributes of the heart guide your life and you know why they're so important, then I think you'll have peace and harmony in every society. And that is what is missing. That is what is missing at the moment.
Chandra.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Dr. Chandra, for another interesting evening and discussion. We will see you again in the next session. Yeah, about a month's time, I think. Yeah, I will pass back to Anindita. Yeah, to do the closing.
Thanks, Anas.
Thank you so much, Dr. Chandra.
Thank you, Anas. As always, you have succeeded putting together things like this. It's very good. God bless you. Yeah.
Thank you, Anas, for moderating the session so absolutely marvelously. And thank you so much, Dr. Chandra, for the sharing. That was a very intense and very enlightening discussion. And I wish we had, another couple of hours to discuss and hear your invaluable views. I know that I am walking away with many new thoughts and definitely many new questions in my head. And hopefully when you return to the MPPI talks, we will be able to put more questions to you. Definitely your words are words of hope and aspiration that will lead us into the future. And I would also like to take the opportunity to thank the participants whose questions made the session extremely vibrant. I trust all of us are leaving today's sessions with many new thoughts about crafting a collective and sustainable future. So, ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Chandra will be back for the next session on the 5th of August, when he will speak on the integration of Sabah, Sarawak, and the Semenanjung. That's on the 5th of August at 8 p.m. And our next MPPI talk, however, will be held on the 22nd of July at 8 p.m. Thanks, Anas, for flashing that. So our next MPPI talk will be held on 22nd of July, 8 p.m. In which Prof. Shad Salim Faruqi will be speaking on, as you can see on the screen, Islam and the Malaysian Constitution. And so please do follow our Facebook page, which is Taylor's Bachelor of Social Science, as well as Anas Zubedy's Facebook page for timely intimations of our forthcoming webinars. Do join us on the 22nd of July at 8 p.m. again. Till then, stay safe, stay healthy, and a very good night from all of us.